There's a version of you that exists somewhere between Sunday night and Monday morning. You know the one. The laptop is open. Maybe it's a spreadsheet, maybe it's a notes app, maybe it's a blank document with a title you've rewritten 7 times. You've been staring at it for a while now. You have this idea, an actual idea, not just a vague feeling, but a real thing you've been thinking about for months, maybe longer. You know exactly what it would look like if it worked. You can picture the customers. You've thought through the logo, the name, maybe even the pricing. You've Googled competitors at 2 in the morning more than once. But you haven't started. Not really. And the strange thing is, you're not lazy. That's what makes this hard to explain. You work long hours. You study things. You prepare. You're the kind of person who reads books like this one, who takes notes, who actually wants to do something with their life. And still, every few weeks, you close that laptop and tell yourself the same thing. Not yet. I need to figure out a few more things first. There's a question I keep coming back to when I see this pattern. Why do so many driven, capable people spend years getting ready and still never start? It's not a simple answer, and I want to be upfront about that. But I think if you sit with this for the next 30 minutes, something is going to shift. Not in a dramatic way, more like a quiet click, the kind where you realize you've been solving the wrong problem this whole time. Let me tell you something about the way most of us were taught to think about building something. In school, if you took a business class, you learned about the business plan. 30 pages, market analysis, 5-year projections, financial models, break-even charts. You were graded on how detailed it was, how much research you'd done, how professional it looked. And when you graduate and get a job, the same logic applies. Before anything gets built, there's a meeting. Before the meeting, there's a slide deck. Before the deck, there's a planning session. Everything runs through layers of approval, committees, budgets, forecasts. The message that gets drilled into you over years, in school, in corporate environments, in the culture, is this: preparation is professionalism. If you rush, you fail. So you bring that same thinking to your own ideas. You prepare, you plan, you research. You protect yourself from failure by making sure every detail is figured out before you move. The problem is, this approach works perfectly for everything except the thing you actually want to build. There's a book that sat with me for a long time after I read it. It's called Rework, written by Jason Fried and David Heinemeier Hansson, the people behind Basecamp, a software company they built without investors, without a massive team, and without following most of the rules people said you had to follow. The book is short, blunt, doesn't waste a word, and it goes directly after the beliefs that keep smart, motivated people stuck in the planning phase for years. I want to walk through some of what's in it, not as a summary, more like a conversation about what it actually means for the way you're approaching your work. Here's one of the first things the book says, and I want to be careful how I say this because it sounds more dismissive than it is. Your business plan is a guess. Not a useful guess, not a detailed guess, just a guess. You don't know how your customers are going to behave. You don't know what the market will look like in 2 years. You don't know what problem will come up 6 months in that you hadn't anticipated. Nobody does. Not the people who write 40-page plans, not the ones who hire consultants, not the ones who spend 18 months in preparation mode. And here's the part that gets uncomfortable. The plan isn't just useless, it's actively in the way. Because the time you spend perfecting it is time you aren't spending making the actual thing. Think about what a business plan really is in practice. You sit down and write out your assumptions about a world that doesn't exist yet. You project revenues you've never earned. You describe customer behavior based on guesses. You predict obstacles you've never actually encountered. And then you treat this document, this collection of educated guesses, as if it's a roadmap. I've seen this happen a lot with people who are genuinely talented. They spend 6 months building a plan. The plan gets refined, it gets detailed, it starts to feel real. And then another 6 months go by, and they're still refining it. Because the plan has become the project. The plan is the work now, instead of the thing the plan was supposed to be about. Rework doesn't say don't think. It doesn't say be reckless. What it says is that the most useful version of planning is short, rough, and disposable. Figure out what you're doing this week, maybe next week. The further out you plan, the more fictional it becomes. This is where things start to get uncomfortable for a lot of people, because if planning isn't the path, what is? Making something. Anything. Something small that actually exists, that a real person can look at and react to. That reaction, that moment of contact with reality, is worth more than 6 months of planning in isolation. There's a belief in American work culture that's so embedded it's almost invisible. The belief that hours equal output, that the person staying latest, working hardest, grinding longest is the one who deserves success. You probably know someone like this. Maybe it's you. Up at 5, in bed at midnight, checking emails on weekends, skipping vacations because there's too much to do. And they talk about it. Not always openly, but it's there. The subtle pride in being exhausted. The identity that gets built around being the hardest worker in the room. Rework calls this out directly, and I think it's one of the most important things in the book. Not because hard work doesn't matter. It does, but because the worship of overwork creates a specific kind of blindness. When you're working 80 hours a week, you're too tired to think clearly. You're too busy to step back. You don't have the mental space to notice when something you're doing isn't working. You just keep doing it harder, because harder is the only tool you have left. And the strange thing is, people who work this way often produce less than people who work focused, reasonable hours. Not always, but more often than the culture admits. There's a reason for this. When you work long hours, eventually everything feels equally urgent. The important things and the unimportant things blur together. You lose the ability to prioritize because you're just trying to survive the week. And survival mode is not the same as building something. The people Rework is pointing at, the founders, the creators, the people trying to build something real, often fall into this trap hardest because they care, because they want it badly. And wanting it badly starts to look like working constantly. But think about the last time you had a genuinely good idea, a real one, something that actually moved forward. Was it during hour 11 of a workday? Or was it in the morning? Or on a walk? Or in that strange half-awake state where your brain is finally loose enough to connect things? The book puts it simply. If all you do is work, you're not going to see the angles that save you. You're not going to have the perspective you need. And you're definitely going to burn out before you get where you're going. Most people have never actually counted their meetings. I mean, really counted them. Every weekly sync, every stand-up, every call that could have been an email, every check-in, every strategy session, every debrief of the debrief. Add them up across a week, and the number is usually shocking. Here's what a meeting actually is when you look at it honestly. Let's say 5 people sit in a room for an hour. That's not 1 hour. That's 5 hours of human time removed from actual work. And at the end of it, there's often no concrete decision, just a vague agreement to meet again next week. Rework is pretty direct about this. Meetings are toxic. Not every meeting, not all the time, but the casual, habitual, reflexive meeting that people default to instead of just doing the thing, that kind of meeting is one of the most expensive habits a person or a team can have. This applies even if it's just you, especially if it's just you. Because when you're working alone on something, a side project, a business, a creative pursuit, the meetings just take a different form. It's the hour you spend reading about what other people in your space are doing instead of working on your own thing. It's the research that doesn't actually change your next step. It's the productivity system you're optimizing when the work itself is sitting there waiting. Most people who say they've been working on something for 2 years haven't really been working on it for 2 years. They've been thinking about it, planning it, preparing for it, researching it, talking about it. That's not 2 years of work. That's 2 years of warming up for work that hasn't started yet. I didn't understand this clearly for a long time, and I think a lot of people never do, because the warming up feels like work. It involves effort. It involves focus. It produces documents and notes and saved articles. It looks like progress from the inside, but progress is only real when the thing you're building moves forward, not your understanding of it, the thing itself. Here's something that separates people who actually build things from people who endlessly plan them. The people who build things tend to solve their own problems, not problems they imagine exist in the market, not problems a consultant told them were underserved, their own actual personal problems, things they deal with that don't have a good solution yet. Rework talks about this as scratching your own itch, and it sounds simple enough that it's easy to miss how different it is from the way most people approach starting something. When you're solving a problem you personally have, you know when you've actually solved it. You know what an unsatisfying version looks like. You know what the real friction feels like. You don't have to guess at what customers want because you are the customer. And when you show it to other people who have the same problem, they respond differently than they respond to something you built based on market research. Most businesses that struggle with product market fit are solving a problem they imagined, something that seemed logical in theory. This gap exists in the market, therefore we should fill it, but they've never actually lived with that problem. They don't feel it. So they build something that's technically correct and emotionally distant, and people can feel the difference. Think about the last product or service you were genuinely excited to pay for, not just willing to buy, actually excited. The ones that tend to hit that way were usually built by someone who was frustrated that nothing good existed, someone who wanted it badly enough to build it themselves, someone who then realized, maybe I'm not the only one. That's a very different starting point than a business plan that begins with, the market for X is $4 billion. One of the most counterintuitive things in Rework is the argument for constraints. Most people treat constraints as the enemy. Not enough money, not enough time, not enough people, not enough resources. And the assumption is, once you remove those constraints, things will really start to move. But watch what actually happens when constraints get removed. Scope expands, meetings multiply, decisions get delayed because there's now room to be more careful, more thorough, more prepared. Suddenly, a project that could have been done in 3 months becomes a year-long initiative. More money means more opinions. More time means more second-guessing. More people means more coordination and less actual work. The book argues, and I think this is right, that constraints force creativity. When you have to ship something with limited time and limited resources, you focus. You cut the things that don't matter. You find the simplest version of the idea that actually works. And often, that version is better than what you would have built if you'd had everything you wanted. This shows up in creative work constantly. The writer with no deadline never finishes. The designer with unlimited revisions never ships. The startup with $10 million burns through it on things that don't matter, while the scrappy one-person operation figures out exactly what matters because they can't afford anything else. I think about this when people tell me they're waiting to have more resources before they start. More savings, more time, a bigger audience, a better setup. The waiting sounds responsible, but what it usually is, and I want to say this carefully because I've done it too, is a way of making sure you never have to find out if the idea actually works. Constraints eliminate that option. You have to find out, and finding out is the only thing that moves you forward. So here's what I want you to notice about all of this together. The planning that goes on forever. The overworking that produces exhaustion instead of results. The meetings and check-ins and prep work that replaces actual building. The imaginary customer instead of the real problem in front of you. The waiting for resources that never feel like enough. These aren't random mistakes. They have something in common. They're all ways of staying in motion without making contact with reality. And I think that's what this book is actually about underneath everything. Not productivity hacks, not a different way to run meetings or a smarter approach to planning. It's about the very human instinct to protect yourself from finding out. Finding out that the idea doesn't work. Finding out that the market doesn't care. Finding out that you built it and no one showed up. Those are real fears. They're not irrational. And the planning, the overworking, the busyness, they feel like protection. If you're still preparing, you haven't failed yet. But here's the other side of that. If you're still preparing, you haven't started yet either. Think about what that means across time. You have a version of yourself that's been working on something for 2, 3, maybe 5 years. And in those years, what has actually been built? What exists in the world that wasn't there before? What have real people touched and reacted to? That gap between the internal reality of how hard you're working and the external reality of what exists is one of the most painful places a person can be. Because you know you're capable, you know you care, you can feel the effort, and still nothing has arrived. And the reason, the quiet, uncomfortable reason, is that effort spent in the planning zone doesn't translate to the real zone. Not automatically, not ever actually, without the thing that none of the planning can replicate, making something real and letting the world react to it. So let's come back to the question I planted at the beginning. Why do driven, capable people spend years getting ready and still never start? I've been circling the answer the whole time, but I want to say it plainly now. Because ready never comes. Not in the way we imagine it. Not the moment when all the research is done and the plan is solid and the resources are lined up and the timing is finally right. That moment doesn't exist. It never did. The people who started something, the ones you're looking at from the outside and wondering how they got there, they started before they were ready. Most of them will tell you that directly if you ask. They didn't have it figured out. They had enough to move, and they moved. Now, I want to be careful here because this doesn't mean throw everything at the wall. It doesn't mean be reckless or skip thinking entirely. What it means is this: the minimum real thing, the simplest, smallest, most honest version of your idea should exist in the world before you're comfortable with it. Not when it's perfect, when it's real. Because the feedback loop you need to build anything worth building can only happen once something actual exists. Before that, you're in a closed system. You're just talking to yourself, planning for a world you invented, protected from the information that would actually change your direction. Here's what that looks like practically. If you have a business idea, what's the most stripped-down version of that idea you could put in front of a real person this week? Not a polished version, not a finished version, the version that tests whether the core of the idea is real. Maybe that's a simple landing page. Maybe it's a conversation with 10 potential customers. Maybe it's making one of the thing by hand before you build a system to make 100. The goal isn't to shortcut the work. The goal is to move the work from your head into the world where reality can help you shape it. And the second thing, which is harder but maybe more important, is to stop measuring effort by hours and start measuring it by what got made. Not what got planned, not what got discussed. What got made. If you worked 8 hours today and nothing exists at the end of those 8 hours that didn't exist at the beginning, a piece of writing, a piece of code, a conversation with a real customer, a prototype, anything, then those 8 hours were spent in the planning zone, not the building zone. And the building zone is the only one that closes the gap. This doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow rewiring of what you count as work. But once you start noticing the difference, once you feel the specific discomfort of a day where you stayed busy but didn't make anything, you start making different choices, smaller ones, more honest ones, and those choices add up. I want to go back to where we started. Late at night, The laptop, the document that's been open for months. You've told yourself a lot of things about why it's not time yet. Maybe you need more savings. Maybe the idea needs to be more developed. Maybe you'll start after the holidays, after the promotion, after things settle down. But here's what I think is really happening in that moment. You know the idea is real. That's why it won't leave you alone. And you know that once you actually try, once something exists and real people can see it, you'll have to stop wondering and start knowing. And knowing is scarier than wondering, because wondering still holds the possibility of everything. But here's what wondering costs. It costs you the years, the actual years that pass while the document stays open and the thing stays unbuilt. It costs you the version of yourself that would have learned what you needed to learn by just starting and adjusting. It costs you the feedback, the clarity, the course corrections that only come from contact with reality. The book doesn't promise you it'll work. Nothing can promise you that. But it does say something that I keep coming back to. The difference between the people who build things and the people who don't isn't talent or timing or resources. It's this. At some point, they stopped planning and started making. Tonight, maybe that's you. If this changed how you see your work, you'll probably find the next one useful too.